The following program is rated M and recommended for mature audiences only. It contains violence and coarse language.
Welcome along to the latest edition of In Person. How often have you watched a movie that's titled Based on a True Story and wondered whether it was close to reality or closer to Hollywood myth? I thought very much the same recently when watching Machine Gun Preacher, the provocative and alarming story of ex-con Sam Childers, who finds God, becomes a preacher, heads off to Africa and saves children from traffickers. And with a combination of compassion and perhaps some brute force. Well, I've got the opportunity to find out what's fact and what's fiction, because the man himself is in town, in studio and in person. Good evening, Sam.
Hey,
welcome along.
how you doing?
Excellent. We'll touch on your life throughout the whole story of it, but
Right.
I'd like to just go back to the movie first of all.
Right.
There's a great movie of redemption, salvation,
Right.
a courageous guy saving kids from evil despots.
Right.
How close is it to the
You
real
know,
thing?
if you read the book that I wrote, Another Man's War, the book came out in the spring of 2009, and that's when Hollywood started talking to me about the rights to the book. That's basically what the movie come off of. So the screenwriter, he didn't only do his own investigation, he even went to Africa with me. He read the book and then he interviewed me hours and hours and worked with me. That's what he come up with for the movie. Now keep in mind, there's many parts of the movie that I feel is amped up. But he made a comment in an interview. He said, you know, Sam says a lot of the war scenes are amped up, but he said, I'm the one that interviewed the children that he rescued. And when you hear the children tell the story, I didn't really amp it up any. You know, so he just didn't use my view. He used the children. You know, he spent 2 weeks in Africa. The screenwriter that wrote the script spent 2 weeks in Africa, lived on the orphanage for over a week.
Did you have much input thereafter? Did they
No,
go back and say,
what
did
you
you
got to
like this?
remember, when you sign on the dotted line, you lose all your rights. There was a few things that I didn't like. There was a few things that I made them take out of the movie. Now, the movie has some hard language, but then again, the movie was not made for Christian people. It was made for Christian people to use as an outreach. It's a secular movie. The language is a little bit rough, but they had some language in it that was using the Lord's name in vain. And I never talked like that when I did cuss and carry on. I just never used God's name in vain. So I made them take that out of the movie. A lot of F-bombs in there, you know. But I think, I mean, you can walk down the street nowadays, I'm sure, right here in New Zealand and hear that, you know.
I think of all the things in the movie, the F-bombs aren't the things that are going to shock people, are they?
Right, absolutely, yeah.
What about the casting? You would have had no choice about who played you, because it's a standing joke. Who would you like to have played you? Were you happy?
When it first started out, the first man they spoke to, was Russell Crowe.
Right.
Russell Crowe is probably a little bit more my size. They can make him probably look a little bit more like me, a little easier, you know, we're about the same height. I had my doubts in Gerard Butler, but after he done the movie, I don't believe anyone else could have pulled it off as good as Gerard. Gerard done a very good job. And like I always say to everyone, I'm better looking than Gerard, come on now. You know, all the girls say, well, he's got a six-pack, I got a keg. Who would you rather party with, six-pack or a keg? You know, but he's a very good guy. I believe he done the role good.
Do you see yourself in him? I'm talking not about the action part, but the mood swings and the anger and the compassion? No,
what you gotta see is, you know, in the movie, I believe that Hollywood showed that I was giving up on God. That was never true. I've never given up on God, but I've given up on the people. You know, I've never lost my faith in God, but I have lost my faith in people, and still do to this day. You know, people can tell you a lot of things. God has never done me wrong. People can tell you a lot of garbage, a lot of crap, but God has always done me justice.
Has the film done your cause justice? Has it helped provoke thought?
Well, you know, the big thing is, and I want people to hear this around the world, and I'm glad you asked me that, I haven't been paid for the movie yet. Hollywood still owes me money. Or I don't want to say Hollywood, because then you're bringing in a lot of people, but I have not been paid for the movie yet. I still owed about $850,000.
It was a box office success.
Well,
there's a delay.
Yeah, you know, I'm still owed $850,000. I think it's pretty bad that a movie comes out of Hollywood showing a man's struggles, showing what his passion was and what he struggled for, and then at the end of the day didn't get paid. You know, so let them deal with that and let them, you know, end up paying me. You know, I got 6 orphanages now. I still feed children every day. I feed about 4,000 meals a day. We want to keep increasing that, and you know, bottom line, I don't want to focus on it, but they need to pay up.
All right, let's go back to your entire life story, which and bits that are not included in the movies, the childhood in particular. Now,
right.
Here you are, let's take it from your teens into the drug scene. I've had a bit of a philosophical argument recently about nature-nurture. I mean, how did you fall into it? Was it upbringing, or was it nature?
No, I'll go back a little bit further, you know. A lot of times when I give my testimony, the first thing people say is, what kind of parents did he have? I had the best parents. I had middle-class parents, born-again Christian parents. Never seen my dad ever drink, you know, drugs or beat my mom or anything like that. They were very cool parents. But you know, I believe I was like a lot of children. We see other people smoking, you know, maybe smoking marijuana, maybe drinking alcohol, and we think it looks cool, and we think it's going to make us look older. So at a very young age, 11 years old, I wanted to look cool. I wanted 13-year-old girls and 14-year-old girls to notice me. So I thought to do that, I had to smoke cigarettes. So I started smoking cigarettes. Then I went to smoking marijuana. 12 years old, I wanted to look like I was 15 years old, you know. So I started experimenting with other drugs and pills and stuff and alcohol. 13 years old, I'm doing more. 14 years old, snorting coke and everything. 15 years old, I didn't care if anyone noticed me at all. I had a drug addiction.
So what were your parents saying to you at that stage? I mean, your dad was an ex-Marine. You must have been a fairly tough guy.
You know, I had a lot of problems with him over it, but, you know, I hid it very well. My dad, you couldn't really pull the wool over his eye too much, you know. But I left home before I was 16. You know, so finally it got to the point my dad knew I had a bad problem, and he told me one day, and you know, a lot of parents think he was wrong, but my dad done the right thing. He said, boy, you either leave the drugs out of this house or don't come back in. So I left home right before my 16th birthday, and at that time, you know, I thought I was, you know, I didn't really care about how old I thought I was because I had a drug addiction. I'm putting a needle in my arm every day, shooting up heroin and, you know, just getting high constantly. And then I started selling drugs, not a little bit, but a lot, you know. And it kept getting deeper and deeper. I went as far off as you could go into that world. And then I became what they called a shotgunner. It's like a hired gun for drug deals, you know, almost like the security guy to make sure that, you know, everything goes good. And finally, I was living in Orlando, Florida at the time, and went out to a bar one night, got into a bad bar fight, and guns come out, and people got shot, and people got beat up bad, and I almost got killed. I almost got killed that night, and on the way home, I said, I'm done living this life. You know, I believe in rehabs, okay? I believe rehabs help. I believe AA, all them programs help. But bottom line, if you got an addiction, it's right here is what's going to get you out of it. You got to make up your mind, I'm done. And that night on the way home, I made my mind up. I walked in the house when I got home. I told my wife we're moving. My wife was looking for a way out. She had that hope that that moment would come that I would walk in and say, we're out of here. And we moved over 1,000 miles away. I don't have a problem with dying, but I have a problem with what I'm going to die for. If I'm going to die for something, I want it to be worthwhile. We moved over 1,000 miles away. My wife starts going to church. I knew what God was because I was raised in a Christian family, but I started getting angry with God. My wife's going to church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, midweek, you know, and it's like God just stole my woman. I got a hot-looking wife. She was a stripper, you know. She's still stripping, but just for me now. But, I mean, I was getting angry with God. So anyways, it was 2 years later till I walked into a church and said, God, here I am. Now keep in mind, I let everyone know this, I'm not a Bible thumper, okay? I love Jesus Christ because he's the one that done miracles in my life. And I'm what they call a freedom fighter. So I fight for the freedom that every man and every woman around the world can choose who they want to serve. You want to serve Allah, you want to serve Buddha, I fight for that freedom. You don't want to believe at all, I fight for that freedom. But me and my family, we choose to serve Jesus Christ. You know, there's many ways to get success in life, okay? Many different ways. I got all of my success only because of Jesus Christ.
What about in those interim 2 years, the temptation to go back to the drugs?
Never did. Once I walked away from that pig pen, you know, in the movie it showed me having a bad day, going back to a bar room, getting a few drinks. The fight part's true. Yeah. I get into a fight now and then. My wife says I'm getting too old to fight. She says, you're going to get beat up bad one day. But I have not drank any liquor at all. Now, I see nothing wrong with having a glass of wine or a beer. Nothing wrong with that. But for me, I have not had a drink, even a sip, in 25 years or done drugs.
So it wasn't specifically the guy in the back of the car that you supposedly stabbed and threw out?
That was 100% true.
That was 100% true?
The first part of the movie, the only thing they exaggerated on was I never went to jail as an adult. I went to jail when I was a juvenile. And when I tell this, a lot of people's like, what? You got to remember, 30 years ago, or 32 years ago, we didn't have fax machines. We didn't have computers. We didn't have remote controls or cell phones. I went to jail on a fake ID, okay? I never was in prison, but when it showed me in the barroom scene, the fighting scene, the drug scene, and stabbing that guy, that was all true. If anything, they never showed in that movie who the real Sam Childers was. The real Sam Childers was a scumbag. He hurt a lot of people. And I mean, you know, I believe on Judgment Day, like the word says, every knee shall bow, every tongue will confess. You have one good thing for you on that day. If you're behind me, you have a long time to wait and think about what you're going to say, because I'm going to have the man tied up for a while.
You're compiling a few brownie points, though, aren't you? You're collecting a few good ones to offset the bad ones.
You know, I had one of the guys that I used to run with and done a lot of bad things with. You know, I was in a cemetery with him, looking at some graves that I put. Because of what happened to them, I blame myself, you know, some people that were in the grave. And I started crying inside of the cemetery, and he made the comment, he said to me, he said, well, Sam, maybe you had to hurt all those people so you could save the ones that you do today. You know, I don't know why I do it, but I know I hurt a lot of people.
Was it always drugs-induced anger? Was that what caused all the mayhem?
You know, I can't say. I mean, it could just been somebody just gone wild, you know. And you know, if we're going to believe in good, we got to believe in evil. If we're going to believe in God, we got to believe in Satan. You know, so you know, and there again, I'm not some spiritual crazy guy up here, but I'd have to say it was, you know, Satan had a hold of me back then. You know? And
do you travel the world freely despite your criminal conviction, if it is? Or,
no, see, I was never convicted of a crime as an adult.
So that keeps you...
Yeah, so that keeps me pretty free, yeah. Right. But before I wrote the book, I had to sit down with lawyers and make sure everything I was writing, you know, the Constitutions has all run out on everything, you know.
You'd hate to have done all that violent stuff and done for slander later.
Right. But, I mean, bottom line, you know, with the things that I have done in my past, I could have went to jail, prison for 20 or 30 years. No
and you were, what, just lucky not to be caught, or?
I would say lucky or blessed. I don't want to say lucky or I'd buy a lottery ticket. I'll just say blessed, you know. You got to remember, even when we don't serve God, God can still have his hand upon us. You know, so I believe he got me out of a lot of scrapes, you know.
And from my understanding, the guy in the back of the car, he survived, though?
Yeah, he did survive. That was based on the truth. And what happened, I actually left town. I was living in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. That didn't happen in Pennsylvania. Happened in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. I left town about 2 days later. But the guy, like it showed in the movie, it would have been self-defense if we would have called the law, but we didn't. We left him on a back road out in the country, and so a car came by and took him in, but I stabbed him several times, and so that was all based on the truth. And I thank God that the guy lived, you know. Yeah.
All right, re-establishing your life outside of the drug world is, how did you make a living? Was it true that you set up a building company?
Yeah, well, I
roofer?
always was a roofer. You know, I worked for other contractors. I always was in construction. That's what my dad was in construction. All my brothers are in construction. So I did have a construction company. Now keep in mind, the only thing that was really messed up bad in the movie was the timeline. Because you got to remember, they took incidents that happened over 30 years and put it into a 2-hour and 10-minute movie. So the construction company that I had didn't come as easy and build up as quick as it showed on there. But it was actually bigger than it showed on the TV. Like I had dump trucks, I had a backhoe, 2-3 dozers, skid loader. I had a lot of equipment at one time. And I did sell everything out and walked away from the business for Africa. That was true.
And Lynn, your wife, not liking that? Was that true?
know, yeah, you know, my wife struggled with it, not as bad as the movie showed it at last. I can say my wife always did back it. She still backs it. And, you know, people say, well, is it hard? I mean, do we struggle? Absolutely. I'd be lying to you to say that it's not hard. But, you know, I told my wife many times, don't make me choose. You know, God called me to Africa, so if I'm going to choose, I'm going to choose Africa. My daughter growing up, like it showed in the movie, my daughter hated me growing up because I was never there for her. You know, I put the work in Africa before my daughter, but I gave her everything I was supposed to. I gave her food on the table, I gave her clothes and everything. But when she graduated at 17 years old, she come to me and she said, Dad, we got to talk. And I said, yeah. I said, what's up? You know, I thought she wanted to go to university. So I said, look, I'll get money together. I'll get you in university. And she says, no, I want to run your nonprofit. And I'm like, what? You know, she hated me growing up. When she was 13 years old, she looked me in the face and said, Dad, I hate you. You love them little black children more than you love me. But she said to me, she said, Dad, do you remember when we'd go to the warehouse and we'd go through the used clothing to get our clothes because you spent all of our money in Africa and we couldn't go back to the store? And I said, yeah. She said, well, if you really remember, I was right next to you getting my clothes. And she said, Dad, do you remember when we didn't have money for food on the table and we would eat beans and rice, rice and beans every night? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, if you really remember, I was sitting at that same table eating with you. She said, if anyone can sacrifice for this missions, I can. And naturally, I said, you're hired. She's 25 years old now. She runs my motorcycle shop on the East Coast in Pennsylvania. She runs the nonprofit. And I mean, that's her life. I mean, you know, but it would have never happened, I don't believe. If I wouldn't have put Africa first, what would she be doing? You know, but she's seen the need. She's seen why. She's seen the dedication. And when she became a young adult, she wanted to do the same thing.
What about the relationship later in life with your parents? Did that repair?
You know, me and my dad was always really close. And I didn't show my dad in the movie because if they were going to show my dad, I would want them to really, you know, really put the spotlight on my dad. My dad was my hero in my life. Taught me never to walk away. Taught me to stand up for the least fortunate, even when the odds are against you. And I think that's what's wrong with the world today. We see things going on all around us, but we won't stand up for it because the odds are against us. And my dad always taught me, you know, there was many times I was always fighting in school, you know, and he'd get called down to the school and the first thing he'd say is he'd look at you and say, what happened, boy? And if it was picking on a bully, you know, bullies didn't last in my school. You know, and I know there's a bullying problem going on around the world. You know, all I got to say is bullies wouldn't last in my school. You know, there was no reason to bully someone. If you want to fight, fight somebody that can fight you back. That shows a real man.
You're just doing it on a grander scale now, aren't
Right,
you?
right, yeah.
What about the building of a church? Physically, did you build the church?
Yeah, and the church, you can go to ShekinahFellowship.com, or you can go to the website Machine Gun Preacher, and you can click over to the church. The church don't look nothing like the movie. It's a very hot-looking church, biker-looking church. It's run by my wife, total debt-free church. You know, it took many years to build it. Started out of an old circus tent, you know, but we were the laughing stock of the town because we started out of a circus tent, and a lot of the churches in town was laughing at me, you know. But you know, I got the last laugh. I got a church that's a beautiful church, total debt-free.
It's a Christian church, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does it have any alignment with any other, perhaps the major Christian churches, or have you formed your own interpretation?
You know, I was raised inside of the Assembly of God Church, the AOG. You know, I'm a Bible believer. I believe in the spiritual gifts. I believe in the move of God. You know, but I don't want to line myself up with any church, and I don't believe churches should line themselves up with any church. It's about being in line with God. Come on, you know. You know, I believe, and a lot of churches don't like me saying this, but like I say, I'm leaving in an hour, so I really don't care. You know, but you know, I think a lot of times churches complicate serving God. Don't complicate it. You know, why do we want to complicate it? Why do we want to put all these rules and regulations, you know? People want to go through Bible study after Bible study. Before you know it, you go so deep, you're out of the Bible and you're giving your own theory. Let's stick to the basics. You know, in the Word of God, Jesus said it, Paul said it. We got to go back to the basics. We got to go back to the basics. Matthew 25, Jesus titled it The Final Judgment, not me. Jesus titled it The Final Judgment. It was about feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the ones in prison. That's the final judgment, okay? Why do we got to complicate it with everything else? Let's just go out and do what he did. What was he all about? Feeding people, man.
Do you get young children who remind you of Sam Childers come in the door seeking help?
Yeah, you get a lot of people like that, and I always try to take up a little bit of time with them. I speak in a lot of schools. I've done one school here inside of New Zealand. I speak in schools. I speak in universities on drugs and alcohol all the time. You know, nobody can tell me drugs don't kill. I don't care who you are. I don't want to hear it from you because I lost my own son to heroin. You know, so drugs kill, bottom line. You know, a lot of people say, marijuana is okay. Marijuana is a gateway drug. You know, everyone that I know that died of heroin started out smoking marijuana. You know, so I'm out to rescue children, not just in Africa, New Zealand, America, Australia. You know, so anytime I get the chance, I'm going to speak out on drugs and alcohol.
And what impact your son's death to drugs did that have on your thinking about God, about
You know,
life?
I think my big impact of what happened with my son is, my son, okay, he was my stepson. He thought that I was the coolest dad around. You know, his dad hangs out with rock stars, movie stars, rides a Harley. You know, his dad's the coolest dad around. And I never focused on my drug habits enough with him back then to show him how wrong it was. So through his death, that's why I go to high schools now. You know, so, you know, did anything good come out of it? Yeah, he motivated me to speak to young adults now.
All right, let's talk about the transition to Africa. It was quite a major decision you made.
Yeah.
Where do you start? You get off the plane and
you know,
where do you start?
I went on a 5-week mission trip and seen the body of a small child that stepped on a landmine. Somewhat like the movie showed, but only the movie showed me being in the village, hearing the bomb go off, walking over, seeing the child, you know, still laying there. Didn't happen like that. I was in the bush and I come across a body that stepped on a landmine of a small child, 7, 8 years old. I couldn't tell if the child was a boy or girl because it was gone from the waist down. And I stood over that body and I said, God, I'll do whatever it takes to help these people. So I went back into Sudan, Africa, supported the people, helped the people, many different ways, pulling landmines out for about 1.5 years. Then I started a mobile clinic. I run it for about 1.5 years, and then I started the actual orphanage, which is called World Mission Shekinah Fellowship Orphanage in Children's Village in South Sudan.
Is that by regular trips to and from the States, or did you basically set yourself
No,
up?
I would, back then it was about every 2 to 3 months I would come back to the States. I tried to run a construction company at the same time, and then finally I sold out in the first part of 2001. I sold out and went full-time ministry, and it was hard. And then I was full-time ministry up until about 3 years ago. God spoke to me to open up a restaurant in Uganda. And I'm like, God, you took me out of business. Why you want to put me back in business? But I have for the country of Uganda, it's kind of a high-end Ethiopian restaurant, American food also. Does very well there. All the proceeds that it makes go back into feeding children and helping children. And then I got a motorcycle shop that come off of the movie. When you watch the movie Machine Gun Preacher, all the main motorcycles in the movie our shop built. Yeah, so it actually got a motorcycle shop started on the East Coast and does very well.
The name Machine Gun Preacher, did that come as a consequence of the movie, or was that a tag you already had?
The name Machine Gun Preacher, I own the name. I got it nearly 14 years ago, 13 years ago. What happened when I started the orphanage, it was started at a time where we would slash grass and we'd do the building with an AK either sitting there or strapped over our back. A lot of the natives would come by and they'd say, this guy is a preacher, and others would say, well, he's got a machine gun, and they'd say, well, he's the Machine Gun Preacher. So missionaries wanted to discredit me. You know, you always, when you're doing good, you always got somebody hacking on you. So they wanted to end up, you know, causing me trouble. So people in the U.S. started saying, he's not a man of God, he's carrying a gun. And next thing I know, a story comes out and they title it Machine Gun Preacher. And when I read the story, I started crying. And God said, stop your crying and claim that name. And I'm like, what, God, what are you saying? You know, and God said, claim that name. So I own the name Machine Gun Preacher. You know, in the U.S., there's a clothing line now called Machine Gun Preacher. You know, there's a motorcycle brand, you know, MGP, you know, and God has literally turned it into a brand, and not just a brand for selling clothing and other things. It turned into a marketing tool. You know, you can put on your church sign, Reverend Sam Childers is in town this week. Not too many people will come out. But you put on the sign, you know, Machine Gun Preacher live here this week. You can pack a church out, you know.
I mean, I had a look at your website, and there's a lot of merchandise on there.
Yeah.
That's all fundraising.
That's not even a portion of what we sell out of the U.S. office. I mean, if you go to mgpratbikes.com, that's our motorcycle shop, and it's filled with clothing. A lot of our clothing was designed by West Coast Chopper. Jesse James is a good friend of mine, and a lot of it was designed by his people of West Coast Chopper.
It's an entire industry now, isn't it? You've become an industry.
It keeps growing. I believe it's going to keep growing and keep growing. We have somebody in Australia that wants to bring the clothing line to Australia now, and I'm all for it. You know, I'm all about making more money. I want to feed more lives. You know, I tell people all the time, if you're doing a little bit of good, don't be satisfied with it. Because if you get satisfied with what little bit of good you're doing, it'll stop you from doing any more. You know, so I'm not satisfied with 4,000 meals. You know, I want to do 6,000. I want to do 8,000. I'm not satisfied with 6 orphanages. I want to do 10, you know.
Describe one of these orphanages. Is there good hygiene, sanitation? Is there
You
3
know,
meals a day?
well, let's
How are we looking after those
let's
kids?
look at, there was a journalist, you know, I was rapped on a few times by people that never was at my orphanage. And a matter of fact, one of the worst stories done on me was done by a Christian organization. And they really hacked on me like 4 pages, just hacking on me. And then on the 5th page, they wrote a 2-line sentence that said, we sent a reporter in and could not find evidence of any of this. They've done a story all on hearsay. But the orphanage in Sudan, what you got to remember, our children living inside are happy, okay? They're not looking outside wanting to go out. But children from the village, they're looking inside wanting to come in. So that should tell you something right there. You know, they get 3 meals a day, they have clothing, they get schooling. You know, the average child in the village of South Sudan, the average child in the village doesn't have the opportunity to go to school. You know, their parents can't afford it. My children get schooling, you know, they get clothing, they got a safe place to live, they got dormitories, they got buildings that's made out of brick and concrete when the people in the village are living in mud huts with grass roofs. You know, now, as you go into town, like I have a home in Gulu where I have children sleeping at, they're regular homes. I have a home in Kampala. Now the farm is started off right from the basics, you know. We started in sleeping in tents there, you know. But all of these projects go for what is in the area, you know. If you look at how my children are living on my projects, 10 to 20 times better than the children outside.
Because the fear is, I suppose, people buying the products, thinking that it's making a contribution. Does the money actually get to the African entities?
Well,
in other areas, but it doesn't seem to be in yours.
Let's put it this way. You know, let's go according to the laws. And I like to show this here. Maybe we can get a picture given to you of the automobile that I drive. Okay. Under the laws of the nonprofit laws in the state of, or in the U.S., I can drive any automobile I want to drive. I can drive a Cadillac Escalade, and I can pay $65,000, $85,000 for my automobile to drive. I could spend $100,000 and use nonprofit money to do that. But I choose to drive a 1991 Cadillac Hearst. You know, I like people to talk, you know. But anyways, I choose to drive a $6,000 car. Okay, so I mean, it goes to show you how I spend my money. I live in a very conservative home. I could live in $1 million home and pay for that home from the nonprofit. But I live in a very conservative country living home. Not because I have to, because I choose to. You know, so I watch how I spend my money, you know. And I got a lot of other people around me that watches it too. You know, we have a board of directors and everything as well.
Well, that's the key, isn't it? Because it's such a big organisation now.
It keeps growing.
People in Sudan and Uganda that you can trust.
Yeah. And I tell you what, all of my business, and I'm not going to knock the country there, but you know, all of my businesses are run by ladies, women from that country. I think the women, you know, women in Africa have been put down so long. I believe that when they get an opportunity to do something good, they work harder than anybody else because they never had that opportunity, you know. But, and keep in mind too that the proceeds or the money that all the businesses make, I got a security company, what everything makes all goes back into the nonprofit for paying bills. So my salary is actually paid out of the money that I make. Yeah, so.
Okay. So when you went to Sudan, right in the middle of the civil war, in the most violent time,
yeah.
Is it a safe place now?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, keep in mind, you know, Kony 2012, I'm not going to hack on them young guys because they worked hard on that documentary, but it was 6-7 years too late. It made northern Uganda look like a dangerous country, and they were still under threat, and they were still in the middle of a civil war. Totally not true. The country of Uganda is very safe. Northern Uganda, there hasn't been anyone killed in 6 to 7 years. South Sudan still has some problems going on, not from Joseph Kony. Joseph Kony never was a threat to them regions, okay? He was a pest. The problem has always been President Bashir. President Bashir is the man that needs to be taken out of office. He's the president of Northern Sudan. He's the only president in all of history to have war crime charges, genocide charges put against him, warrants for his arrest, and still be in office. The man needs to be taken out. You know, we hear about South Sudan, but let's go back to looking at Darfur again. Thousands of children are dying every month. Thousands of children. Not because of Joseph Kony, because of President Bashir. South Sudan, they had a peace agreement. It was broke. They had money flowing into the country, 350 some barrels of oil a day coming into the country. President Bashir stole over $880 million worth of revenue, and when he got caught, he said, yeah, I own the pipeline. If you don't like it, shut it down. So they shut it down. The country, once again, people are starving in South Sudan because they lost 98% of the revenue. Is Bashir killing people now? He's killing them through starvation. But just a few days ago, he sent out a Russian Antonov and started bombing in South Sudan again. This man needs to be took out of office.
So you're a fan of intervention, Syria, for instance. Should someone go in there and fix that? Do you like that kind
I
of?
believe that we need to do a lot of our problems we need to fix with special forces. I think we need to take the Geneva Convention and throw it away. The only people that respects the actual convention is the Americans. You know, come on. You know, President Bashir, when he sends his Antonovs out to bomb, he tells them bomb everything that has a red cross on the top of the roof. Who is that? That's Red Cross. In war times, we're not supposed to bomb schools, hospitals. Bashir bombs all of them. You know, this man needs to be taken out of office. And I think sometimes when we deal with people like the president and the war that we're, you know, that's almost coming to a head now, send special forces in, do what needs done.
Is it that easy, though? It's a difficult operation, isn't it?
Yeah, just don't tell nobody what you're doing.
Right. So, Kobe, do you want him found? Are you worried about that?
He needs to be brought to justice.
Because he's indicted.
He's hiding out in the Congo. He needs to be brought to justice. He needs to pay for the crimes that he did. Bottom line, you know. Yeah, I know how I would want him to pay, but I don't think it goes by what I want. It goes by what needs to be done. He needs to be brought to justice.
Let's talk about the action conflicts. Again, we see them in the movies.
Yeah.
How often are we actually involved in some?
I've been ambushed over 10 times.
Right.
You know, I've been in over 10 major battles in South Sudan. You know, so they're all based on the truth. But you got to remember, Jason Keller, the man that wrote the script, when he interviewed these children, the children told him what they seen. So even though I might say, man, that stuff's all beefed up, that stuff's, you know, you got to remember, he got most of those interviews from the children, you know, children saying what they've seen. The very children that I rescued out of the war. You know, and there again, you'll hear things on the internet where, you know, I never rescued a child out of war. Come talk to the children. There's been many journalists. There's actually a documentary getting ready to come out of the real machine gun preacher. And the actual the children that are interviewed in the documentary, I wasn't even around when they were interviewed. They told their own story. And we're not talking about a handful, we're talking about hundreds of children that have told their story of how they were rescued.
Has there been a drastic reduction in that time and the amount of child trafficking that takes place? Is that still...
you know, it's been very, very decreased, very bad. But you got to remember, if there's one child being killed of a war crime, still too many. You know, so I don't think we should concentrate on has it been decreased. We need to concentrate on is it stopped.
The guns are obviously a highly controversial issue in America itself, with the school killings, the theatres, and just recently the naval shooting. What's your view on the gun laws in the States?
I'm 100% in gun control, 100%. If I have it in my hand, I got control. You know, so that's...
You I might trust. Other people maybe not so much.
But what you got to remember, if you look in, especially in the U.S., of all these bad killings and everything that has happened, the people that have had those guns should not have had them and didn't have them legally. So I'm 100% for if you're going to carry a handgun, you should be licensed. That's our laws of the U.S. If you're going to carry a handgun, you're to be licensed. So the people that have done these crimes should not have had crimes or should not have had guns. They had mental illness problems and a lot of other issues. They were ex-felons. They should not have had guns to start with. But let's be honest, you know, let's look at countries. You guys got some pretty hard gun laws here. You have gun crimes in your country.
We do.
How many people you have in your country? 4 million?
Yeah.
4 million people in your country. We got 360 million people. You know, so naturally our gun crimes are more, but there's more people, you know. I don't believe violence and gun crimes and, you know, crimes against other people, I don't believe we can ever stop that. We can only work to have it stop. But there was a survey recently done where they went into the prisons and they asked the people that done violent crimes to other people. They said, if you knew your attacker, or if you knew the person you was attacking had a firearm, would you have done that? And they said, heck no, heck no. You know, so I'm 100% for gun control, and I'm 100% for people carrying a firearm if they're going to use it the right way in order to protect themselves.
I think if someone like myself, I couldn't kill an animal, a cat or a dog, or I'd hunt or fish or anything like that. But if someone broke into my home, I always ask myself, and I had a gun, could I use it? Is there a breaking point for everyone, and it's at different parts of the scale? You
got to remember, if somebody's coming into your house, are you married and have children?
No, none of the above.
Okay, well, you know, if they're breaking into your house, they have already thought what they're going to do if they wake you up, and they're going to kill you. You know, if they're breaking into your house and they know you're at home, they already have a plan what they're going to do if you wake up. So I think you better have a plan, you know. And you got to remember, I'm not a violent person, you know, and I get asked this a lot, you know. I'm not a violent person anymore. 30 years ago I was. I rescue children now.
But sometimes that requires force?
I rescue children now.
Yeah. There's a lot of great Hollywood lines, but the one in your movie, a real line, which I love, and I paraphrased it, and that's the one where if someone steals your child and I offer to get it back, will you ask how?
Right.
That's a fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
And you know, I had somebody one time, they say, well, I don't have any children. All right, what if it was your mother? You got to remember, I've come into villages when they were cutting the breast off of elderly women, when they were skinning people alive. You know, I don't look at color. I don't look at race. I don't look at what religion you are. It's people being hurt. You know, we're all going to stand before God today, or at the end of time, we're all going to stand before God for our actions, whether you want to believe it or not. You know, and we're going to have to stand up for all the times we turn our back on people. And, you know, I might have to stand up and answer for a lot of other things, but it's not going to be for walking to the other side of the street and letting somebody, you know, be hurt.
Do you have nightmares?
I've had a couple, you know, people ask me if I had any nightmares of what I've seen in Sudan or any of the other problem areas I've been in. And no, the only nightmare I ever had is if somebody, you know, I woke up like twice crying in my sleep because somebody told me you can't go back to Africa. And that's the only thing that would bother me. I love Africa. I love the children in Africa. I love the work I do in Africa. I love Africa. And if you go to the East Coast in Pennsylvania, you see my office building, you see my motorcycles. I mean, we build motorcycles. I've got a beautiful office building, beautiful wife, beautiful grandchildren. When you look at everything I have, and then you look at that I go back to Africa, you would understand, wow, this guy got to be in love with his work. Yeah.
And so what proportion of the year now do you spend in Africa versus home?
7 to 8 months a year in Africa, and then the other 5 months of the year I'm on the road touring, raising funds. And you know, I don't like to, you know, I don't like people to think that I'm here in New Zealand just to raise money. You know, I'm here in New Zealand to carry a message of hope to change lives. Since the 23rd of last month up until last night, we've had nearly 1,600 lives changed. You know, and that's people to stand up and say, you know, I'm going to make some changes in my life. I'm going to start doing good. You know, some people saying, you know, I'm going to dedicate my life to Christ, you know. Other people saying, you know, I'm going to walk away from drugs and alcohol, you know. I carry the message of hope that you can be successful. If I can, you can. And even a successful man or lady, they will still want to be more successful in life. You know, the message of hope, you can't go wrong anywhere.
So it's true to say the machine gun bit sells tickets to the movies, but the spoken word has been far more powerful for you.
Absolutely. You know, I think what I tell people a lot, you know, I have a guy that runs with me all the time and stuff, Kevin Evans. And I always say, you know, people make a big deal at what I've done with the machine gun, but he's done far more with his camera, you know. So I think the gun just gets the people's attention.
And what's your profile in these countries? Are you recognised? Obviously, you'll stand out for various reasons, but
Yeah,
are you
you know,
being recognised for the good work you've been doing and getting help?
I've been with the president several times of Uganda. I promote the country of Uganda. Uganda, I feel, is like America. It's a free country. You know, a foreigner can go there. You know, me and you, we're foreigners in Uganda. You can go to Uganda and start a business like that. You know, it's not a hard thing to do. And you can go to Uganda and buy a home. You know, I don't know if I could come here to New Zealand and just up and buy a home and start a business real easy.
I'm sure about that
you know?
either, actually.
Yeah, you know, so I love Uganda. South Sudan is still a nation that is struggling due to the fact of President Bashir. Ethiopia, I mean, I'm doing work in Ethiopia, you know, so all of them got their good points. They got their bad points, but then look at America, and we got ours.
Well, some might say, you have got problems at home, why not help your own?
We do, we do. My wife runs the mission side in the U.S., so we do a lot, like at our church that's in the U.S., we have a campground, so they work constantly with troubled youth, troubled adults, you know, people that has addictions with drugs and alcohol. They have a food pantry also at the church, helping people struggling with, you know, food and everything. So they do a lot on the U.S. side, as well as I tour at high schools and universities all the time speaking, you know.
But first time in New Zealand?
Yeah, first time here. Love it, man. You know, but I do got to say, I thought they were bringing me to a tropical island with palm trees and coconuts and pineapples, you know. And then I get here and snow in the mountains and I'm cold, man. But I got to say, your country is beautiful. You know, I want to say this. You've got some freedom that we've lost. So you got to protect the freedom you have here in New Zealand. You know, it's the first time in many decades that I've ever traveled through an airport and didn't go through security. And you know, sometimes we overlook the little bit of freedom we have in our country, but you know, New Zealand, hold on to what you have. You got some pretty good freedom here.
There's a balance to be made, though, isn't it, with that freedom versus security? How do you get that balance?
Yeah,
given the threats of today.
You know, I tell you what, you know, I was very impressed on walking through your airports, very impressed. And I don't even believe I could describe it to American, because, you know, you might go through two or three security, you know, areas before you get through an airport in the U.S., you know, screenings. And I was very impressed with the airports, how they look inside and everything, your towns, you know, everything. I'm sure you guys got your downfalls like every other country, but hold on to the good that you have.
What more can you achieve in your life? It's a relatively short space of time. So, what, 20 years you've been on the right side of the ledger, if you like?
16 years I've been in Africa. You know, my big thing is, you know, I'm probably too old now. I'm 51 years old. I'm probably too old to become a millionaire.
It's not old.
But I don't want to become a millionaire. I think the thing that I look forward to is to be able to leave something behind that somebody stands by my casket one day. They can say, well, wow, you know, he did this and he done this and he helped this country and he helped these children. That means a lot more to me, changing lives and changing nations, than it does getting rich. You know, and what people got to look at is the last 3 years, if I would have walked away from Africa, I would have had enough money that I'd never have to do anything the rest of my life. I could ride a different motorcycle every week, rock my grandchildren on the porch, and, you know, never have to worry about working again. But I chose to keep serving in Africa.
And the movie gives you the springboard to...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now we're booked for the next 2 years, you know, speaking. You know, I do motorcycle events and big venues, little venues. Some of the venues that I spoke at already here inside of New Zealand, people ask, why here? You're the reason why I'm here. You know, I speak in, you know, I don't look at how many people's going to be there. You know, I went to a school the other day, and I think there was only 20-some kids there. You know, I don't care, you know, and the guy that was putting it all together felt bad. I said, why? You know, I don't look at the numbers, you know. I don't care. I got meetings tonight, you know. I hear it's going to be a pretty good, you know, a lot of people there, but, you know, if there's 10, I'm okay.
Should have a word for your wife, Lynn. I mean, that marriage has been tested a few times, hasn't it?
Absolutely, but like I say, you know, I can't say it to you because you're not married. I usually ask most married people, when was the last time you argued with your wife or your husband? You know, I haven't argued with mine in over a year probably.
Being in different continents,
never home.
Maybe help. Yes,
and
right.
when I am home,
Right.
we ain't arguing.
Right.
You know.
What can Joe Average do? The ones that aren't brave enough to get on a plane and face adversity. What can the man in the street do to actually achieve something like this?
I think the biggest thing is hearing from God, you know, and a lot of people say, I don't want to hear the God stuff. Okay, then hear from your conscience. When something's telling you to do good, it could just be maybe go down the street and buy a bag of groceries and give to your neighbor. You know, it could be just maybe mow your neighbor's lawn. You know, I think whenever that little thing in your back of your mind tells you to do something good for someone, do it. Whether it's in Africa or New Zealand or Australia or America, do it. But whatever that little thing in your mind, I'll call it God again, whatever God tells you to do it the very best you can do it. That's all. That's all He requires.
You've had tremendous courage, haven't you, over the years, even, you know, pre-God, post-God.
Yeah.
Latent courage that's given you the ability to fight through adversity and get through the difficult times and face the fears?
Yeah, I never did ever fear death, you know. I never did fear it. You know, everybody says, what's the most dangerous thing that you ever had to face? Eating my wife's meatloaf, I think, was probably the most dangerous.
You feel safe today in travelling as you do in these areas?
You know, I've had death threats over the years, and yeah, I feel safe, you know. I know probably President Bashir would like to get his hands on me, but
And
that's
vice
good.
versa?
That's
Vice
good.
versa?
You know, like I said, he needs to pay for what he's done. And I don't believe he'd want to be in the same room with me. I think he's a coward. Yeah, I think he's a coward. If he's not, maybe we should be in the same room.
So what's left to achieve? What would you like to, the last thing you'd like to achieve, if you
know,
had to have one more?
Martin Luther King had a message he called he had a dream. You know, and that dream got him killed. You know, maybe mine would get me killed one day, but my dream is that there'll never be another child go hungry in this world. You know, in America, what we spend on dog food a year, you could feed every starving person in the world. Yeah.
Can you see some successes to your legacy, people that will continue this good work?
We can only have
Once you've moved
hope.
on?
We can only have hope. You know, that's what hope's all about. I know there's a lot of young people that's coming on board and standing next to me, standing behind me and backing me, you know. So I know if something happens to me right now, I know my daughter is going to keep it going. And I mean, all we can do is have hope. That's it.
There's a lot of sacrifice been made
Yeah,
to get this far.
Yeah, it's been good. I'm living the dream, oh man. I'm here in New Zealand, living the dream.
So where to next? What's your next stop? Is it back home or is it back to Africa?
No, I fly from Brisbane, Australia on the 24th. I go back on the 23rd to Australia, one night for a meeting, and then I go back to, back to Africa. And then the end of October, go to India. I got the Mother Teresa Award for social justice. I got it this year.
Excellent.
And never dreamed I'd ever get anything like that, and didn't do anything to get it. You know, I never had that in planning. But it's one of the biggest social justice awards you can get in the world today. You know, so I go to get that in October. I go back to the U.S. November for Thanksgiving, and then back to Africa for 2 months again.
Well, it was an inspirational movie. The life story is far more so. Sam
All right,
Childers,
thank you.
It's been an
Bless
absolute
you.
pleasure.
All right,
the best
thank
luck.
you.
That is this edition of In Person. Join us again in the very near future. Good night.